Thanks for joining us on Fascism on Film. I'm James Kent. I am a writer. I work for a local newspaper in Vermont called the Mountain Times. And with me is Teal Menton. He's a writer, an author, and he is a professor of knowledge.
Yes, a professor. I'm a professor of creative writing.
There we go. We are your guides, if you will, through Fascism on Film. And this is season 2. And this is our 4th episode of season 2. So we've got some back issues there that you can take a listen to, and you can find us on fascismonfilm.com, or you can hear us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbeam. We're out there. You can find us, subscribe to us, and then you'll get all the episodes, and tell a friend.
And leave us a review.
Leave us a review. We love it. Yeah, because we're trying to put this out here. Really, we have another show that we don't do as much now because we're doing this show, and that's called Stuff We've Seen. And that's sort of like whatever we feel like. Sometimes we're doing new movies, we talk about genres, etc. But we think of this series as an opportunity to kind of put out a bunch of episodes on a topic, and that people can kind of go as a resource and check out films, because fascism might be in vogue now. We don't know. But
yeah, and it I've said this before, but it is nice to see what other people have had to say about fascism, how to show us how people have experienced and survived it, and there is sort of a basic human truth that these films are trying to communicate to us. They reach out to us with something really essentially human, and we can have empathy for people who've gone through this and survived fascism. And so it really is not just about sort of wallowing in how horrible fascism is, but also finding some hope. And I feel like the film we're talking about today does have some hope.
There's obviously a lot of films made about fascism as World War II was ramping up and during World War II. Then you had a crop of movies that came out afterwards from people and filmmakers that were in it and wanted to comment on it. And then, you had the next generation of filmmakers that might have been children, and that was in the 70s. And then in the 80s, a lot of films, when we talked about Mephisto, and you still had a lot of directors that wanted to, say, do their fascism movie.
Yeah.
And the film we're going to talk about is 1980s French film, The Last Metro, by the well-known filmmaker François Truffaut, who died much too young, just a few years later, of cancer. This is a film that had for many years, I knew about it, but it has escaped me. I didn't even know what it meant. I mean, The Last Metro.
Yeah, I didn't know what it meant either. And it has a very specific meaning in the film, which is that if the curfew happens in Paris, and you have to get on the last metro home, and otherwise you're stuck and you'll be rounded up in the curfew.
Yeah. Now, so let me put the setting here. We're 1942, and historically, what was interesting is, for a time, once Germany invaded France, and France basically, surrendered very fast. At first, there was a dividing line north and south of France. The north was controlled by the Germans, and the south was controlled by the Vichy government, which was, of course, very amenable to the Nazis. But then, as we knew it would, anybody knew the Nazis basically took over the entire country. But there was a small period where people could kind of escape over to the Vichy line and try to make their way over to Spain or other places. This film takes place inside the world of a theater, and it's a theater company, and the film it's set up, basically the theater owner and director, this guy, Lucas Steiner, he is a Jew, and he has escaped. He's left
the country.
He left the country.
And left his wife behind to run the theater.
Yeah, and his wife is a famous, she's a film star, but she's also a theater star. And what's fascinating about this film is, for the first 35 minutes of the movie, that's the story we're under. And again, I want to give a couple of setups here, and then I'm going to want to turn it over to Teal a bit, because I have seen the movie, and I've just rewatched it. Teal had not seen the film, and so I'm very curious to hear
I've
his
seen
thoughts.
it twice now.
Oh, you've watched it twice now. Okay. And this is the first time that the two of us have actually discussed it. So I really don't even know what his thoughts are. But a few things that are interesting is Francis Truffaut. I have not seen a ton of his movies. I certainly haven't seen his whole filmography, but from what I can take is it's hard to pin down kind of what his style is.
Yeah.
But one thing that is very interesting to keep in mind is Truffaut was a huge Hitchcock fan.
Yeah.
He was a critic first, and then he became a filmmaker. And he is one of the champions that turned Hitchcock into, I guess, a genre suspense guy into what critics regard as one of the greatest film directors. And it's really Truffaut and the Cahiers du Cinema. And he did like interviews with Hitchcock. And keeping that in mind, watching this film, and it didn't hit me the first time I watched it, but when I watched this movie the first time, I feel like I was on pins and needles. I found the movie so stressful and intense, and I realized that in many ways, this was Truffaut's opportunity to kind of pull Hitchcock a little bit.
Right. Even though it's not necessarily a mystery or a thriller, it does have some of those elements.
Yeah, it's a very suspense because, and again, I think it's essential for this conversation to tell us that after 35 minutes, we discover that Catherine Deneuve, who plays the actress Marion Steiner, her husband Lucas has been living underneath the theater this entire time in a sort of a basement apartment she's set up. And now the rest of the film, it's very suspenseful because there's a lot of dynamics of, just from the way that the film is set up, there's many layers. Everybody wears the mask, and that's where the entire film, most of it's shot on a soundstage, incredibly looking, by the way, sets, and it's shot by the master Nestor Alejandros, and so it looks amazing. But you have a movie that's essentially about theater and performance, and you have, of course, what's going on in front of the stage as they're staging a play. Mm-hmm. You have the behind the scenes, and then of course you have underneath, which is where this guy
theater,
is.
Yeah, in this little basement apartment.
And you have almost every actor in this movie is playing three roles.
Yes.
You have them as their job, right? Their theater job. So even her husband, he's a director, and he's playing the director behind the scenes. He's trying to feed her information.
And he has a little air vent. He can hear what's going on the stage, so he can listen to the play during rehearsal and take notes and give those to her and the director to have them incorporated into the play. And so he is kind of directing from the basement.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have so Catherine Deneuve, right? The actors, they have their performances as actors.
Yes.
Then they have like their behind the scenes performances with each other.
Yes.
And how they behave. And then, which is to me where this brilliance of this movie is, there's this third layer, is that they all have either secrets. They have a secret life as what they're doing during this occupation. And you have Catherine Deneuve, who has to keep this major secret about her husband and have that life and not tell anybody.
And at the same time, maintain appearances and make concessions to and negotiate with the occupying power and try to maintain keep her business going, essentially, and hold on to the theater through this.
Yes. And then you have the guy who's sort of the backstage hand guy, who he is the guy who works to try to get black market stuff that they need.
Yes.
And he seems to be a guy that you're not sure, can you trust him or not? But it turns out he's very trustworthy. And then you have Gerard Depardieu's character. He's this actor.
Bernard,
and he's a noted actor, and he's come to there. And he also seems like maybe he's a Lothario, but behind the scenes, he's working for the resistance.
Behind the scenes, he's working, but also they hire him because they have to fire their Jewish actor.
Yes.
So he comes in and takes that role. And yes, he is part of the resistance. Like, we find out that he actually put a bomb in a record player and is doing this. And late in the film, he says, you know what, I'm going to quit acting and just do the resistance because the acting doesn't seem quite as meaningful to him anymore, even though it is, in a sense, a form of resistance, right? Is that just putting on the play itself is a form of resistance, and I also think about survival as a form of resistance, right? She's essentially in a survival mode. She's trying to get her husband out of the country. They keep having different plans for how they're going to pay somebody to get him over the border and such, and then the plans fall through. And
one of the things that François Truffaut does, and I think it's absolutely brilliant, he creates one of the great screen Nazi-ish villains ever.
yes,
And basically, what has always vexed the creatives are the film critics. And
yeah,
he uses the role of the theater critic, this guy Doxiat, to be the ultimate villain. He's basically a quisling, a
yeah,
total, working hand in hand with the Nazis because he sees the opportunity for power for himself to rule over the theater world.
yes.
And he is so despicable in the way you watch how some people will cozy up to an enemy for their own power and desires.
Something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of fascism in general, and this film really got me thinking about, is that we have a few options when we're occupied, right? You can flee, which is what they're trying to do with Lucas, is that he's trying to flee. You can resist, which is what Bernard is doing. Is actually an active part in the resistance. You can survive, which is what Marion's doing, which is just trying to get by. You can cooperate with them, which everyone has to do a little bit at some point. And then the other one, the final one, is that you can collaborate. And that's what Doxiat is doing, is he's a full-on collaborator.
And I think that the role and everything about is so well written
Yes.
that he just really becomes this really full villain because it's fascinating. And I guess it took a little bit of like having some real world experience to see how some people will look at what's clearly evil and corruption and
Yeah.
say, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to go on that side because I can get things that I want.
Exactly.
And I feel like I'm seeing that in real time.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the collaborators, the people who are saying, "Wait, I can gain from this, so I'm not just going to cooperate. I'm not just going to go along with it. I'm actually getting involved, and I'm going to be actively involved in doing this in order to get myself more power." And Doxiat, wants to be the most powerful critic, and part of one of the tools he uses is anti-Semitism. And the review he finally writes of their show is that it's too Jewish. And so he's really gone all the way with the Nazis here. He's become one essentially.
Yeah, and that's another thing this film does is it gives a great example of anti-Semitism in action and not
Yes.
in the typical we're rounding you up and we're sending you to the concentration camps. This is a film where we hadn't quite reached where we were in Mr. Klein. Right?
Yes.
Mr. Klein is right before they started rounding everybody up to the climax where they're getting rounded up.
Yeah, so it's like a year after the last Metro.
Yeah. And so what we're dealing with here is all the restrictions going on.
Yeah.
And, there's this Jewish girl who loves the theater and is finding ways that she can sneak in
Yes.
to the theater to not be identified because she wants to see the theater so bad. And that adds that humanity aspect of how insane it is that these people were being targeted for insane reasons.
Yeah.
There's the guy who is Jewish, but is used by the authorities to be part of the fire marshal, right?
Yes.
And
Yep.
so he gets to be at the performance because they have found a use for Jewish people.
Yes.
And of course, he's labeled.
Yes, of course he's labeled. Yeah, and so it's this question about sort of what is resistance, and is this what Bernard is doing is active resistance. The other characters are sort of doing a passive resistance, and it doesn't actually change anything, right? They don't actually affect change, but they do manage to somehow survive and get through this. And they at times they have to collaborate a little bit. When the Nazis come in and want to search the theater, they can't just throw them out. they have to step up their hiding and concealment from the Nazis, but they can't just kick them out. They have to cooperate a little bit, and she has to cooperate in terms of like what plays they put on are restricted by the Vichy government.
Well, that's the thing is Doxiad has come in and he basically is that person will give the stamp of approval or not of whether or not they can put on a play. I mean, he keeps getting himself more powerful with the regime as this film goes on, which really focuses on one segment. There's a kind of a at the end of the film that kind of skips ahead, and it's really just it wants to kind of show you this one moment in time.
I have a question about this movie, and I haven't settled on my answer yet, but I'm wondering, is it a realistic telling, or does it sentimentalize or romanticize this a little bit? And my one issue with the film is that epilogue, is that very ending bit, because it's a happy ending. And I have odd feelings about having a happy ending on a story like this, where they actually get away with it, and the war is over, and the love triangle is resolved, and Lucas is alive and survived it, yes, it's a hopeful ending, and I like the hope, but I also, part of me feels like, do anti-fascist films have to have tragedy at the end?
And that's what I think I was surprised when I watched, because the climax of the film happens right before the epilogue.
Yeah.
And that's where the Nazis are shown up and they're going to search. And I think that's where the tension of the movie is the whole time is you're like, is this guy going to get discovered? Because once we discover it, that's 35 minutes into a 2-hour and 11-minute movie.
Yeah.
And so we are now, oh boy, because we have this knowledge of all these films, and you know that these people always get discovered. So you're expecting, I think the expected is that he's going to get discovered, he's going to get pulled away, and it's going to be this tragedy. And yet the unexpected is kind of what happens in this film. Now, in the epilogue, he's down there for 800 days.
Yes.
He has to live there 800 days. And then when he finally comes out, it's really where, like, they're still fighting in the streets and the partisans, and it's those last few days before that area is completely liberated, and he almost gets killed.
He almost gets killed. Yeah, it is kind of funny. I mean, coming up out of the basement after 800 days and almost getting shot and I think there's a line about how nobody knows who's shooting at who. It's just people out in the street shooting at everyone.
Yeah, and that's where the real situation is that kind of craziness was happening, and especially like in Italy when Mussolini was first arrested, there was a small brief period of time that Italy thought, that's it. We've stopped. They didn't realize that the Nazis were just going to come in and then hold the entire nation hostage until the entire country was liberated by the Allies.
Right.
But this film, I think the potency is that the film starts, it's like 1942, and it actually says that. And we know that the war isn't over for a couple more years.
Yeah, we got 3 more years to go.
Yeah. I mean, and the parts of France, though, were getting liberated. So probably for them, even though the war was on, like, there was a point in time where they were probably free again. But to have this film kind of be over and realize there's that much more time, it sits in my mind anyway that these people still had to go through a lot. We don't get to see that chapter.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And for me, this is a film about survival and doing what you need to survive. And that's ultimately what happens is they do survive sort of without giving up too much of themselves along the way. But it is he does have to suffer. You're right.
But I also think that, again, I'm not familiar with the play that they're putting on, but I think that in any of these things, there's always what's happening in front of the stage and what's happening behind the stage. And there's people that they cannot, because of the situation, they can't give themselves away. So there's this pressure, and Catherine Deneuve's character is under this pressure. She remains, it's seemingly calm, but then there's this moment right before the opening night where everything is coming to a head, and she, right before she has to go on stage, she runs to the toilet and she pukes.
Yeah, well, first he asks her, "Are you fine? Are you nervous?" She's like, "Oh no, I'm totally fine. I'm totally calm, cool, and collected." And then she runs out of the room and throws up.
And it's not opening night nerves. It's everything.
Yeah.
She has to play again, like almost the role of a lifetime, right? She's this actress, but she has to act because until the climax of the movie,
Yeah.
she is
Nobody
revealed
knows.
to nobody what's going on. And the only person that you maybe get a hint that suspects, and if he knew and if he was part of helping her, he never let on, is the stagehand guy.
And he's the only one who would possibly know if anybody did. But she does end up telling Bernard, the Gerard Depardieu character, she ends up telling him because she needs help in hiding everything in the basement and covering it all up so that when the Nazis come, they just see a basement.
And I wonder if she only trusted him because he revealed to her something that she didn't know about him, and that is he was gonna join the resistance full time.
He's gonna quit acting and join the resistance.
And that's another thing about Gerard Depardieu. His character, he seems like he's, this rugged guy, and we know a lot about Gerard Depardieu, but he's like, on one hand, he has this thing for some strange reason of the production designer.
Yes.
And she keeps rebuffing him in ways. And then later, right? So she's wearing a mask too, because her and this young ingenue actress who's doing like 1,000 different things when she's not doing the play because she wants to be a big star. Turns out the two of them are lesbians.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not something that in 1980 you got in a lot of movies.
No, and it's definitely not something that was out in the open in, say, 1942 in Paris.
No.
They hide their relationship, and she finds out. Marion finds out, but she doesn't really care.
No, because I think there's, in the theater, there was lots of stuff going on. But it's, again, it's these layers revealed. These people are not free to live the lives that they'd like to live. And it reminds me when you're under the umbrella of fascism.
Yeah.
What you have to do to kind of get through. There's very few people in this movie that are able to just enjoy themselves. And that's interesting.
Nobody can just enjoy themselves. The tension is always there. There's always the feeling that maybe they're safe inside the theater, which is why when the Nazis come in at the end, it's such a violation. But it almost feels like they're safe inside the theater, and the outside world is just out to get them at all times.
Yeah, and that they're doing a service because the movie keeps reminding that despite all the curfews and all of the air raids and the danger, that movie theaters and theaters were packed because people needed an escape.
Yes, and also the power was still on in some of the theaters.
Yes, and that was they have this ingenious thing when the power was out in most theaters and electricity during these final bombing days that the stagehand guy got all these headlights hooked up to wires, and they're on bicycles pedaling really fast in order to keep the lights on. But again, this is another film that it's been out there for 45 years, and I kind of feel like it kind of got lost, and that's maybe because it's an area where a lot of people, I don't think, for many years really wanted to think about the topic of fascism.
That's something else we're talking about here is that we've talked about this with Fellini, but Truffaut here also is that they're contending with the national memory of something. And so they are saying, Truffaut is sort of making a statement on what France was doing during the war and what it was about. And it shows the collaborators and it shows the survival and it sort of shows all these different aspects of what France was going through under German occupation. And so I think that Truffaut is dealing with the national memory in some way. And as we know, France and Italy, their films didn't really want to deal with this until the 60s.
I don't think in the 40s, France didn't really have a film industry.
Not much, no.
And so it really wasn't until the new wave came out that they suddenly started getting some prominence, and some of these film critics became filmmakers themselves, like Truffaut and Godard. And as we know, that Godard never really went in and touched fascism in a very specific way.
I feel like he does in his own way.
As I said, is in his own
yeah,
way.
in his own way, but he of course did everything in his own way. But I do feel like Godard does deal with World War II, and with he does address it in his own weird way somehow. In Weekend, definitely.
Yeah, but we just don't get.
Well, we don't get a World War II movie from him.
No,
what we don't get.
And as far as I know, this is the only sort of foray into this territory that Truffaut ever did. Am I correct? I don't know.
Yeah, and this was actually part of a planned trilogy, a showbiz trilogy.
Yeah.
And Day for Night is the companion piece for this. That's the one about film, and then there was going to be another one about music, I believe.
Yeah, and of course, a few years later, Truffaut died, so
Right.
that never happened. But did you read up on this film when you went into watching it for the first time, or did you come in kind of like cold?
I came in cold. I mean, I knew what it was about in terms of I knew it was a theater under occupation, but I didn't really know many details. And so it was it was a great viewing experience. I mean, I feel like this is so similar to what the majority of people go through when they're living under fascism. Yes, there are those people that are getting rounded up immediately, but there's a lot of people who are not getting rounded up immediately, who still are working through this and suffering under it in a lot of different ways. Lucas, of course, would be rounded up instantly if he wasn't hiding, but it shows the cost and just what it puts on a whole society to have everyone going through this, and that there are lots of different forms of survival and cooperation and collaboration. There's lots of different ways to get through living under fascism.
Yeah, there's also another interesting thing that happens in the later half of the film where she has to go, and I think it's because basically, and this Doxiot guy, it's really more of his scheming, is the arrangement of her being able to legally own the theater.
Yes.
Is in jeopardy.
Yes.
And so she goes to the local Nazi headquarters, and she's supposed to meet with a guy.
Yeah.
And then she's given kind of the runaround that he's been called to the front and he's not there. And then this other guy who's all nervous and jittery, and he's got his arm in a sling and everything, and he's some other Nazi guy, pulls her aside because he's such a fan of her as an actress and lets her know that the guy's not here because he killed himself the night before. And he's really creepy, and he's grabbing on her hand and really holding it, and it's a really weird scene.
Yeah, he won't let go of her hand. That's very weird. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of weird intrigue in the film. I don't know. There's just something that is so well crafted about this movie. And again, it's weird. It's so beautiful looking.
It's so beautiful looking, yeah.
But there's this just a little bit of hint of artificiality that seems to be done on purpose because it's a world of the theater. Yeah. And even in the very last scene, which it seems like Catherine Deneuve is visiting.
Right. It's a little trick. We think it's a scene in the movie, but it's actually a scene going on stage.
Yeah. And then he slowly reveals the trick.
Yeah.
Which I like when he pulls back a little bit and you see that there's painted backdrops. Yeah. But in that, it shows a badly wounded Depardieu, and that she'd really loved him all the time, and that her husband dies, and you're meant to think that for a moment that, oh, he didn't make it, they must have got him, and then pull back and you realize, of course, because the director, her husband, is able to hear stuff. He's very intuitive. He kind of knows that his wife may have fallen for Depardieu, and he even writes this play.
He writes the play, but he also says to Gerard Depardieu, "She loves you. I hope you love her back."
Yeah, and then there he is. He's up in the box, kind of watching the whole thing and loving it. So I actually really like. It's weird to have an epilogue to a movie and it's suddenly oh, this is how they're ending it. But I really like it. And maybe it's, I think there's some stuff going on there that actually makes it really good. So I am happy. I loved all these characters. I didn't want to see them die, except for maybe Doxiot, and he seems to have gotten his in a way in the epilogue.
Yeah, he definitely has gotten his. He also gets in that fight with Bernard. Bernard,
well, that's what I was saying, is that even the moments where they seem to be enjoying themselves, they go out to eat as a little theater troupe and enjoy just a night. And then Depardieu sees Doxiot at another part of this dinner, and he grabs him and
Yeah.
drags him up the stairs so he can apologize for the terrible review, Catherine Deneuve, and then he wants to beat the crap out of him.
Yeah.
And so that's another facet where you see that Depardieu's character's values, like this is a guy who loves France, right? He loves his country. He hates that it's been occupied. And he's not the guy who you think would ever stand up for these rights.
Yeah, because he seems like sort of a egotistical actor who's out for himself, and he comes across as sort of a pretty boy. And it turns out that no, actually, he's got these really deep values and is doing is out there planting bombs and doing sabotage. And yeah, he isn't just the pretty boy.
So, I mean, again, there's a movie with a lot of layers, and it's even talked about, right? Because that was this whole joke that Depardieu does where part of his like scheme to get the woman, he does a palm reading and he says, you're two different women. And he's right in a sense with Catherine Deneuve and also the designer because, so yeah, this is a really interesting sort of addition to our series here.
And I should add that, in addition to sort of all the fascist stuff going on in this movie, there is a really interesting love story, story about marriage. The characters are really very rich here and incredibly well performed and written.
Yeah, because you know what? I mean, again, we're not selecting these movies just for the fact. I mean, it has to have more. Otherwise, who's going to watch these things?
But this one definitely has more.
It does. It has a lot of layers. So I remember the first time that I decided I wanted to watch this movie, I don't know. I thought, this is, sometimes there's reasons why you haven't seen a film. And I thought, I'm going to be in for like kind of a chore here. And then I just got sucked in. And even now, the second time, again, it was a couple of years ago that I first watched it, I was worried I wasn't going to have enough time to watch the whole thing for this taping. And I really wanted to rewatch it to be refreshed. And pretty quickly, I'm like, getting sucked right back in because the movie just is very interesting.
It's really very interesting. Yeah. And I think it's worth seeing, I mean, for many different reasons, but part of it is just sort of the almost banal aspect of fascism, that it's like it shows up in things like theater critics and stuff like that. And it is just sort of part of the everyday life of these characters as opposed to a big battle that they're engaged in.
On that note, we put together what we call a little syllabus of films for the season, and it was the rewatch here of The Last Metro, which reminded me again of, I think originally when we've been fashioning, doing a kind of a book version of this whole series, that I thought of films like To Be or Not to Be and Mephisto and this film, The Last Metro, kind of being three films that have a sort of a common ground here because there's a lot about the theater.
Yeah, they're about theater and about actors and performance and deal with a lot of similar themes about wearing masks and things like that. So
with the next film, I think we switched up what we were going to do. And because I see an interesting relationship here, not just in the time frame that this other movie that we're going to talk about next week it takes place, but also this idea of using a medium, in this case, film and film critics, and also film theater, and a tie-in to the plot is Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds.
And we'll be talking about that next time.
Yeah, so for those that are like, oh, they're going to talk about Inglourious Basterds. Well, you know what? We're going to talk about Inglourious Basterds, so get set, people. That'll be on the next episode of Fascism on Film.
Thanks so much.
Bye.